Hi, my name is Lauren Shepard. I'm 29 years old and I live in a two-bedroom apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, with my cat Wren, a very ugly but comfortable couch I bought with my second paycheck, and more peace than I ever thought I'd be allowed to have. And I never, not once, thought I'd be telling this story on the internet. But something happened 3 months ago. Something that shook me so deeply that I sat down at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning and just started writing it all out. And when a friend read what I'd written, she said, "Lauren, you have to share this. Because I know 100 women who've lived some version of this. So here I am. I want you to know before I begin, I'm not telling this story for revenge. I'm not bitter. I worked really hard not to be bitter. But I do think there's something important in it. Something about what it means when the people who were supposed to protect you decide very early on that you're not the one worth protecting. And then what happens when time turns the tables. Let's go back to the beginning. I grew up in a small house in Greenfield, Ohio. The kind of town where everybody knows your family. Where the grocery store cashier went to high school with your mom. Where gossip travels faster than weather. My parents, Diane and Gary Shepard, had 2 daughters. Me, Lauren, the older one. And Brittany, my younger sister, who was 18 months behind me and about 1,000,000 miles ahead of me in our parents' eyes. I want to be careful here, because when you say something like that, my parents had a favorite, people often assume you're exaggerating. That you're being dramatic. That sibling rivalry clouds your judgment. I am not exaggerating. I want to give you a few examples. Not to make you feel sorry for me, honestly, I'm past that, but so that you understand the world I grew up in. So that when I get to the part about the trash bag and the $40, it doesn't feel like it came out of nowhere. When I was 9 years old and Brittany was 7, we both wanted to take dance lessons. The studio in town had 2 spots left in the Saturday morning class. My mom signed up Brittany immediately. When I asked about me, she said, "Lauren, you're not really built for dance." I was 9. When I was 13 and needed new shoes for school, my dad told me to check the Goodwill on 5th. That same week, Brittany got brand new Nikes from the actual shoe store at the mall. I remember sitting on my bed holding the brown paper bag from Goodwill. Trying so hard to feel grateful, and just not being able to. When I was 16 and asked if I could borrow the car to go to my friend Maya's birthday party, my dad said no, the car was for important things. The next morning, he let Brittany drive to the mall by herself. She was 15 and didn't even have her permit yet. I know how this sounds. I know it sounds like I'm keeping score. And maybe I was, a little, because when you grow up in a house like that, scorekeeping is a survival mechanism. It's how you make sense of the confusion. It's how you stop feeling like you're going crazy. The worst part wasn't any single incident. The worst part was the atmosphere. The feeling, from as far back as I can remember, that I was somehow in the way. That I was tolerated in my own home rather than loved. That Brittany was the sun and I was just weather. I used to watch the way my mom's face changed when Brittany walked into a room. The way it lit up. And then I'd watch what happened when I walked in right after. Nothing mean. Nothing loud. Just nothing. A kind of flatness that a child learns to read very, very fast. I became very self-sufficient, very early. I learned to do my own laundry at 10 because nobody was going to do it for me. I learned to make dinner from whatever was in the fridge, because if I waited to be fed at the same time as everyone else, I'd eat cold leftovers alone. I got my first job at 15. Babysitting for the Hendersons down the street. And I saved every dollar like my life depended on it. Because some part of me, even then, knew it probably would. Senior year of high school, I made the mistake of getting my hopes up. My college counselor, Mrs. Patterson, called me into her office in October. She sat across the desk from me with this big smile and said, "Lauren, you have genuinely impressive options here." I'd gotten a near-perfect score on my SATs. I had a 3.9 GPA. I had 2 years of work experience and a letter of recommendation from my English teacher that she later told me she cried writing. Mrs. Patterson walked me through 3 schools: a state university 2 hours away, a smaller private college with a partial scholarship, and one Reach school, a place I'd dreamed about since I found their brochure in the school library in 9th grade. I went home that night buzzing. I sat down at the dinner table and I laid out the information. I was nervous, but I was also excited, and I let myself be excited, which, looking back, I should not have done. My dad listened. He nodded a few times. And then he said, "Well, you know the college fund isn't really... there's not as much in there as we'd hoped." I said okay, that's fine, because there was the partial scholarship, and I could take out loans for the rest, and I'd keep working. My mom cut me off. "Lauren, we've been meaning to talk to you about this." She looked at my dad. He looked at his plate. "We've decided to use the savings to help Brittany. She's going to need more support. You've always been so independent." I remember the exact feeling in my chest. Like someone had reached in and squeezed. I asked her to explain what she meant. She said Brittany struggled more academically. That she needed more time to find her direction. That she'd need the financial cushion more than I would. "You'll figure it out," my mom said. "You always do." Like that was a compliment. Like, "You don't need us," was something a mother should be proud to say about her child. I didn't cry at the dinner table. I'd learned a long time ago not to cry in front of them, because it never changed anything and sometimes seemed to annoy them. I went to my room and I sat on my bed and I stared at the ceiling and I thought, okay. I just have to figure this out on my own. Like always. And if you've ever dealt with family like this, if you've ever sat in a room where you were loved less and nobody admitted it, then you already know the particular kind of tired I'm describing. The kind that lives in your bones. I graduated in June. Valedictorian. My parents came to the ceremony. My mom took more photos of Brittany in the audience than of me on the stage. I'm not going to dwell on that. The conversation that changed everything happened 6 weeks after graduation, on a Tuesday night in early August. I was in my room packing boxes for the dorm. I'd figured out the financial aid. I'd taken a second job. I had a plan. I was leaving in 3 weeks, and despite everything, I was excited. College felt like oxygen. My mom knocked on my door and came in and sat on the edge of my bed. She had that look on her face, the one I'd learned to be afraid of. A kind of careful look, like she was about to say something she'd been rehearsing. She told me that Brittany had been accepted to a cosmetology program. It was a private program, not cheap, and she needed to start in September. And between that and some unexpected expenses, they needed my room. I remember the silence after she said that. "What do you mean you need my room?" I asked. "Brittany is going to use it as a practice space. For her clients." "Mom, I leave for school in 3 weeks." "Yes, and we thought rather than coming back for breaks and things, it might be better, cleaner, if you just got set up at school and stayed there for the year. You can make friends, find somewhere to stay over holidays, you're so resourceful." There it was again, that word, resourceful. Like it was a virtue, like being forced to be capable is the same thing as being loved. I asked her to be straight with me, and she was, finally. She said that with Brittany's program and everything else, they couldn't really do the back and forth of having me home for holidays, that it would be too much. That I should spread my wings. "Are you telling me I can't come home?" I asked. She didn't answer for a long time. You're 18, she finally said. You're an adult now. My dad came in an hour later and handed me a trash bag. Literally a black plastic trash bag. You should pack what you need, he said. The rest we'll donate. He left $40 on my dresser. I don't think either of them thought there was anything wrong with that. I genuinely believe they slept fine that night. I packed my bag. I called Maya and asked if I could sleep on her couch for 3 weeks until school started. She said yes immediately, and then she said words I have never forgotten. Lauren, you are worth so much more than this. I moved into Maya's living room. I worked doubles every shift I could get. I saved every cent. I cried in the shower at Maya's because I didn't want her to hear me. And one morning she knocked on the bathroom door and said, "I can hear you, babe, and it's okay." I started college that September with $847 in my account, a partial scholarship, federal loans, and a fury so quiet and so deep that it had become something almost like fuel. I want to fast forward because you don't need every detail of the next 10 years. But I need you to understand what I built, because it matters later. It matters a lot. College was hard. I worked 20 hours a week minimum, sometimes more. I graduated in 4 years with a degree in business administration and 0 extra time for anything that wasn't either studying or earning. But I did it. I walked across that stage and I thought of my mom saying I was resourceful, and for the first time, it made me smile. Because I had taken that and made it into something real. After graduation, I got an entry-level job at a mid-sized logistics company in Charlotte. I liked logistics. I liked the problem solving, the systems, the clear metrics. I was good at it in the same way I'd been good at survival, by paying attention, by working twice as hard, by never waiting for someone to hand me anything. By 25, I was a team lead. By 27, I was a department manager. I bought my apartment at 28. Small, but mine. I painted the walls the color I wanted, a soft, dusty blue that my mother would have hated. And I put up shelves and filled them with books, and I stood in my living room alone on the first night, and I felt, for one of the first times in my life, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. During all of this, my parents and I had minimal contact. They called occasionally, usually around the holidays, usually when they wanted to share something about Brittany, her new business, her boyfriend, a trip she'd taken. My dad called once to tell me Brittany had bought a car, as if that was information I had requested. I was polite. I kept conversations short. I did not visit. I did not offer anything. I had built a life that didn't require them, and I was protective of it the way you're protective of anything you built from scratch. I want to be honest about something here. I thought about them more than I probably should have. There's a grief that comes with having parents who don't quite love you right. It doesn't go away cleanly. It sits in the back of your chest and shows up at weird times. At other people's holiday dinners, when a friend casually calls her mom to ask a recipe question, when you fill out a form and there's a space for emergency contacts, and you write your friend Maya's name because who else is there? I was in therapy from 23 onward. Best decision I ever made. My therapist, Dr. Renee, helped me understand a lot. Helped me see the patterns. Helped me stop waiting for an apology that was never coming and start building something that didn't need one. Now we're at the part I actually need to tell you. 14 months ago, my Aunt Carol, my dad's older sister, who I'd always been close to in a long-distance, Christmas card kind of way, called me. This was unusual. We talked maybe twice a year. "Lauren," she said, "I don't want to blindside you, but I think you should know what's happening with your parents." She told me. Carefully, gently, with pauses between sentences, like she was testing how much I could absorb at once. The short version, Brittany's cosmetology business had not gone well. It had, in fact, never really gotten off the ground. She'd opened a small studio 3 years ago, taken out loans under my parents' names, with their blessing, and the studio had closed within 18 months. The debt hadn't. And Brittany, rather than taking responsibility, had moved in with a boyfriend in Florida and more or less gone quiet. My parents had been covering the loan payments out of their own income. My dad had retired 2 years earlier. My mom had never worked full-time. The payments were gutting them. They'd refinanced the house once already, and 6 months ago, 6 months before Aunt Carol called me, they'd gotten behind on the mortgage. The house, my aunt told me quietly, was in foreclosure. They had 60 days. I sat on my couch after that phone call for a long time. Wren, my cat, climbed into my lap and I just sat there with my hand on her back, and I breathed. I want to tell you what I felt, because I think it's important to be honest about it. I didn't feel happy. I know that's what some people expect. That moment of vindication, that righteous satisfaction. And there was a small, tired part of me that thought, well, here we are. But mostly what I felt was something older and sadder than that. A grief I couldn't quite name. Because even when your parents fail you, they are still your parents. Even when the house was never really home, it's still where your childhood lived. There's a loss in watching people you once needed fall apart. Even when they hurt you. Even when they earned it. I didn't call them. I waited. My mother called me on a Thursday evening in March. I saw her name on my phone screen and I took a breath and I answered. Lauren. Her voice was different. Smaller than I remembered. How are you doing? I'm fine, Mom. How are you? A pause. We've had things have been difficult. I heard, I said. I didn't pretend otherwise. Aunt Carol told me. Another pause, longer. Of course she did, a sigh, then. Lauren, your father and I are in a situation. We're going to lose the house. We have about 4 weeks. I know. We were hoping, we thought maybe we could stay with you. For a little while. Just until we get back on our feet. And there it was. The same front door. Very different circumstances. I didn't answer right away. I had actually thought about this moment for the 2 weeks since Aunt Carol had called. I'd talked it through with Dr. Renee. I'd written pages in my journal about it. I had thought very carefully about what I believed, what I was capable of, and what I was willing to do. I told my mother I needed a few days to think about it. She didn't like that. I could hear it, the old bristle, the tiny hardening in her voice. She was used to me just figuring things out, adapting, making it work. Resourceful Lauren, who doesn't need a timeline, who just handles it. It's a little urgent, Lauren. I know, I said. I still need a few days. I called my therapist the next morning. Dr. Renee listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is one of the things I love about her. When I finished, she said, "What do you want to do?" I said I didn't know. She said, "What does the part of you that isn't afraid say?" I thought about that. And then I said, "It says I don't owe them this, but it also says I'm not sure I could live with myself if I turned them away entirely." "Those can both be true," she said. "The question isn't binary. The question is, what does help look like that you can actually live with? What are your conditions? What are your limits?" That was the conversation that changed everything, because I realized I'd been framing the whole thing wrong. I'd been thinking about it as a yes or no question, help them or don't, let them in or lock the door. But that wasn't the real question. The real question was, if I do this, how do I do it without losing myself? How do I help from a place of genuine choice, rather than the same old obligation I spent my whole childhood drowning in? What are my conditions? I called my mother back 2 days later. I told her I'd been thinking about it. I told her I was willing to help, but that there were some things we needed to agree on first. I heard her exhale. Relief, I think. I kept going. I told her that if they came to stay with me, it was temporary. 3 months, maximum. We would set that expectation from day one, and both of them would actively use those 3 months to find long-term housing, whether that was renting, moving in with family elsewhere, whatever. But I was not a permanent solution, and I needed them to be honest about that with themselves. Second, while they were in my home, they would treat it like my home. My rules, my schedule, my space. I was not asking for much, I was asking for basic respect. No commentary on how I live. No criticism of my choices, my apartment, my furniture, the way I load the dishwasher. Third, I wanted to have one honest conversation about the past. Not a fight. Not an accusation. Just a conversation. I wasn't demanding an apology, but I was telling them that I needed them to hear me. Once. Clearly. So that we could move forward without me carrying it silently the way I had for my entire adult life. My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "We can do that." She said it quietly, and I thought I heard something in her voice that I hadn't heard before. Not quite shame, not quite sadness. Something that was maybe the beginning of both. They arrived on a Saturday with their car packed, and my father's expression locked into a kind of stoic dignity that I recognized from my whole childhood. The face of a man who did not know how to be wrong, and was pretending he wasn't. My mother looked older than I expected. I hadn't seen her in 4 years. The years had done something to her face, not just aging but a kind of wearing. Like someone who had been holding something heavy for a long time. I had set up my second bedroom. Clean sheets, a lamp, a small dresser I'd bought from the thrift store and refinished myself. I'd put a little plant on the windowsill because I am, at my core, still someone who wants things to feel okay, even when they're complicated. My dad walked in and looked around the apartment and didn't say anything. Then he said, "Nice place." That was the most I would get from him for a while. And I knew that. I was prepared for that. My mom walked in and stood in the living room and looked around, and her eyes landed on the bookshelves, and then the framed prints on the wall that I'd picked out, one at a time over several years. And then the window with the view of the city below, and something passed across her face that I couldn't quite read. "You did all this yourself?" she said. "Yes," I said. She nodded slowly. "It's beautiful, Lauren." I didn't know what to do with that. So I just said thank you and showed them where the towels were. The first week was awkward in the way that early weeks of any difficult living arrangement are awkward. A lot of careful navigation. A lot of everyone staying in their lane. My dad mostly watched TV. My mom cleaned things, not in a critical way, but in the way of a woman who needed something to do with her hands and her anxiety. At the end of the first week, on a Friday evening, I asked them both to sit down with me. My dad looked immediately uncomfortable. My mom sat very still. I had notes. I'd actually written it out because I knew myself well enough to know that in an emotional moment, I'd either go too hard or lose my nerve entirely. So I had it on paper, and I read it. I told them what I remembered. The dance lessons. The shoes. The car. The college fund. The trash bag and $40. The moment my mother told me I was resourceful like it was supposed to be enough. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just read it. Calmly and completely. When I finished, the room was very quiet. My father looked at his hands. He didn't speak for a long time, and when he did, what he said wasn't exactly an apology. It was more like an admission. He said, "We didn't see it the way you did." "I know," I said. "That's what I need you to understand. That it happened whether you saw it or not." My mother cried. I didn't expect that. Real tears, not performance. I've seen performance tears from her before, and this wasn't that. She put her face in her hands and cried in the way of someone who has been keeping something inside for too long. "I don't know why we did it," she said. And that was actually the most honest thing I'd ever heard her say. Not, "We didn't mean to." Not, "You misunderstood." Just, "I don't know why." Which meant, underneath it, that she knew it had happened. My dad looked up at me. "You deserved better than that, Lauren," he said. "I know that doesn't fix it." And he was right. It didn't fix it. But it was something. It was the first stone in the foundation of something that might eventually be okay. I sat with that for a moment, and then I said, "Thank you for saying that. That's what I needed." Let me tell you something I did not expect to feel during those 3 months. I expected discomfort. I expected friction. I expected moments of anger and grief and old wounds reopening in the night. And all of that happened, in smaller doses than I'd feared. What I did not expect was to feel something like pity. Not condescension, real pity. The kind that comes from watching people reckon with the consequences of their choices and realizing, for maybe the first time, that things could have been different. My dad started going to the senior center on Tuesday mornings. He came home the first day and told me they had chess, and he'd won 2 games and lost 1. And the way he told me, the smallness of his pleasure in it, broke my heart a little. My mom found a part-time job at a dry cleaner's 3 weeks in. She came home the first day smelling like steam and cleaning solvent, and she sat at my kitchen table and said, "I forgot what it feels like to earn something." She said it quietly, like she was telling herself more than me. I watched them, during those weeks, become smaller in some ways and more real in others. I called Maya one night and told her I was having a hard time. "Because of them?" Maya asked. "No," I said, "because I don't hate them. And I kind of expected to." At the 8-week mark, my mom told me they'd found a 1-bedroom apartment in a complex about 20 minutes away. Affordable, clean, available in 2 weeks. "We'd been saving," she said, which I knew, because I'd quietly watched. Neither of them had spent frivolously during those 2 months. They were not the same people who had handed me a trash bag. Or maybe they were, but something had rearranged itself. I helped them move in on a Sunday. It wasn't a grand gesture, just 3 trips in my car, some boxes, a rented truck for the furniture they'd pulled from a storage unit. My dad kept trying to carry things that were too heavy for him, and I kept taking them from him, and he let me, which was its own kind of progress. Standing in their new living room, surrounded by their boxes, my mother looked at me and said, "Lauren, I don't know if we'll ever be able to fully—" She stopped. Started again. "I know we don't deserve your help. I know you know that. And I think that makes it mean more." I didn't have a perfect response to that. I don't think there was one. I said, "I helped you because I chose to, not because I owed you, and that's the difference." She held my eye for a moment, then she nodded. "I know," she said. "I know." I've been thinking a lot, in the months since, about what this whole thing means, about justice and its shapes, about what it means to forgive people who haven't fully earned it, but who, maybe, are finally trying. Here's what I've landed on. What happened to me as a kid was wrong. Full stop. No nuance there. A child deserves to be loved without conditions, without comparison, without being handed a trash bag and told to figure it out. I deserved better. I said that out loud finally, in my own apartment, to my parents' faces. And they heard it. And something shifted. That is not a fairy tale ending. They didn't suddenly become the parents I deserved. My dad still struggles to express emotion. My mother still sometimes says things that make me have to take a breath before responding. We are not close in the way that I imagine some families are close. We probably never will be. But we are in contact. We have dinner occasionally. My mom texts me sometimes. Small things, a picture of a flower she saw, a recipe she tried. Nothing big, but present, and chosen. Here's the part people ask about most when I tell this story in person. Do I regret letting them stay? No. And not for the reason people expect. I don't regret it because it was the right thing to do. I'm not sure it was, necessarily, in some objective moral calculation. Other people in my exact situation might have said no and been completely justified. I don't regret it because it healed everything, it didn't. I don't regret it because they deserved it, they didn't. Not from me, not right then. I don't regret it because of what it said about me. Because I made that decision from a place of my own choosing. I looked at the situation clearly, without obligation, without the old childhood need for their approval, and I decided, I can help, with conditions, and survive it. That is not the same as the kid who had no choice. That is entirely different. Because I had a choice. I just decided to use it a certain way. That's what 10 years of building yourself looks like. That's what therapy looks like. That's what surviving a trash bag and $40 looks like. Brittany, for what it's worth, eventually called to thank me for helping our parents. It was a short call and a little awkward, and she did not apologize for anything, which I noted and then sat down. I didn't tell her off. I didn't say everything I could have said. I just said, I hope you're doing well, Brittany, and I meant it. Because I don't need her to be punished for me to be okay. I already am okay. I am better than okay. I am in my dusty blue apartment with my ugly comfortable couch and my cat Ren, and my bookshelves, and my career, and my 2 decades of scars that turned into, somehow, the best version of myself. And if my parents' house falling apart is justice, then justice looks a lot quieter than I thought it would. And a lot more complicated. Here's what I want to say to anyone who grew up being the one who wasn't chosen. You were not wrong about what you saw. You were not too sensitive. You were not imagining it. The love that wasn't given to you was real in its absence. The trash bag was real. The $40 was real. But so is this, you get to decide what happens next. You get to decide whether you open the door or not. You get to decide what conditions you put on your own healing. You get to decide what forgiveness looks like for you. Whether it includes them or not. Whether it requires them to earn it or not. You are not obligated to let people back in. Just because they're family. Family is not magic. Blood is not a free pass. Love is something demonstrated over time. And the absence of it leaves a mark. But you are also not obligated to stay closed forever. If opening the door, carefully, with conditions, on your own terms, is what helps you move forward, then that is a valid choice. What you are not allowed to do is let other people make that choice for you again. Not your parents. Not your sister. Not anyone. You are the one who built this life from $40 and a trash bag. You decide who gets a key. If this story meant something to you, if you've lived any version of this, if you know what it's like to be the one who was handed less and expected to ask for nothing, I really hope you'll leave a comment below. Not for me, but because sometimes reading that someone else understands is the thing that makes a hard night a little more bearable. I read every single one. I always will. Take care of yourselves. Genuinely. This is Lauren Shepard, logging off.